internal conversation can function like the filter through which you view every chance or hurdle on your journey. It quietly intertwines with your thoughts, shaping the decisions you make and the bravery you display or hesitate to show. Whenever you ponder a fresh endeavor or encounter a test, that voice within has an opinion, whispering assessments or reminders. These can either drive you ahead or hold you back. It might suggest you're not fully prepared or that you've already attempted enough, dampening your eagerness to venture beyond familiar grounds. However, on better days, it may reassure you that a minor obstacle isn't a reason to quit, igniting the drive you need to persist. Gaining control over that voice alters your reactions under pressure, your preparation for challenges, and your approach to major goals. It's more than just maintaining positive thoughts. It's about intentionally steering your inner commentary so that, instead of reinforcing every doubt, it uncovers possibilities and solutions you might overlook. This isn't a skill acquired in a single afternoon. It's a steady shift in what you accept as true. When your mind communicates, learning to pause, question, and reframe the stories you tell yourself is crucial. Once you integrate this practice, the grip of worry or habitual self-criticism loosens, making room for a focus on what you can genuinely influence. I noticed how this transformation extends from handling daily stress to pursuing larger ambitions you once thought were too bold. Everything changes when your self-talk supports you instead of working against you. Your inner dialogue doesn't just comment on your day, it sets the tone for every interaction, whether it's a crucial conversation or a moment alone with your grandest plans. If that voice undermines your efforts or highlights every minor risk, you hesitate. But if it's tuned toward growth, even amid uncertainty, you find the resolve to act. Over time, these repeated internal discussions shape not only what you attempt, but also how you persevere through setbacks. Mastering your inner voice is like learning the language that dictates your confidence, resilience, and capacity for joy in the long run. Sometimes your internal monologue is subtle, weaving in and out of your thoughts without you even noticing its influence. That's one reason it's so powerful. If it remained loud and obvious all the time, you'd find it easier to challenge. But because it often operates beneath your consciousness, you assume the conclusions it whispers are automatically correct. This single habit, accepting every internal remark as truth, can lock you into a cycle of repeating judgments. You might tell yourself you're too disorganized to attempt something meaningful or too inexperienced to chase that idea, and before you know it, you're simply following the script your inner voice laid out, concluding it must be right. Mastering your inner dialogue begins with noticing that script at work. Maybe you become aware of how you talk yourself out of small risks, like applying for a new role or introducing yourself to a potential collaborator. You catch that flicker of second-guessing, I might embarrass myself, and observe how quickly it surfaces. Or you notice the opposite, how rarely you reassure yourself when anxiety flares. These observations might feel uncomfortable at first because it's easier to push aside self-doubt than to label it openly. But by acknowledging that voice, you start to see its pattern, how it flares up in certain situations or uses specific phrases that freeze you in your tracks. Once you've labeled it, that's the part of me worried about rejection. You're able to respond rather than obey. Shifting the tone of your self-talk from critical to constructive usually involves practice rather than a one-time decision. There might be days when you easily give yourself the benefit of the doubt and others when self-criticism creeps back, telling you every flaw in your plan or body of work. On those tough days, the key is gentle persistence. You remind yourself that if an acquaintance or colleague described the same struggle you're facing, you'd likely offer compassion and solutions, not condemnation. So you pivot, speaking to yourself as if you were a friend, acknowledging the difficulty without labeling it as a dead end. That single pivot can break the loop of negativity that would otherwise drain your motivation. In essence, you replace a punishing voice with a guiding one. Curiosity proves helpful in rewriting your self-narration. Instead of fixating on an "I failed at this," you ask, what can I do differently next time? This question isn't just a mental shift. It encourages a problem-solving mindset, turning what felt like a statement of finality, "I messed up," into a step that invites learning. Over time, this habit of turning gloomy self-talk into curious self-talk means fewer minutes spent dwelling and more spent experimenting, adjusting, and making progress. You gradually reframe each challenge as workable. Each slip is an experiment that yields data. Gaining awareness of your physical and emotional state can tune your internal dialogue in a beneficial direction. Suppose you notice that when you're tired or hungry, your mind floods with negative commentary. Realizing this pattern helps you prevent a spiral. You understand that what feels like a profound reflection of your abilities might just be a passing reaction to exhaustion. Giving yourself a break or a meal can transform that litany of self-doubt into something more measured. Conversely, if you sense that your energy is high, you might deliberately prime your thoughts for optimism, recognizing that you're in a prime state to address a complex issue rather than allowing the moment to slip by unutilized. By synchronizing with your bodily rhythms, you harness periods of greater clarity to do heavier mental lifting and interpret difficulties with more balanced insight. Another subtle shift is replacing vague self-labels like "I'm useless at deadlines" with specific, solvable statements. "And I struggle with scheduling, especially in the afternoons." That refined description changes your inner story from a personal flaw to a logistical challenge you can address. Perhaps you realize afternoon lulls come because you skipped lunch or let minor tasks pile up, overwhelming you. Once you pinpoint the real issue, solutions become apparent. You can plan lunch breaks or reorder your tasks, thereby diminishing the negativity that used to echo in your head all day. Forging a healthier inner voice doesn't demand relentless positivity. It's natural to feel disappointment or doubt when faced with real setbacks. The difference is in how you interpret these feelings. Do you see them as reaffirming that you lack ability, or do you see them as signals that you're stretching beyond your comfort zone? By choosing the latter perspective, you frame fear or frustration as normal byproducts of growth. This reinterpretation doesn't cancel out the challenge, but stops it from spiraling into a question of your worth. Over time, you develop resilience that leans on a calm sense of, wait, this is difficult, but that's part of the process, rather than, this is proof I can't do it. People often wonder why mastering the internal narrative can feel so transformative. The reason is that so much of your motivation, persistence, and even joy is woven into that private conversation. If the conversation criticizes every shortfall and dismisses each attempt as doomed, you might never muster the energy to press forward. But when that same conversation respects your effort, highlights small wins, and remains open to the possibility of improvement, you walk into each situation with a level of confidence that might otherwise have seemed unattainable. Instead of bracing for failure, you focus on the next progressive step, reinforcing a cycle of incremental, steady success. In some ways, your internal monologue sets the stage for every challenge that unfolds in your life, acting almost like a commentator in your head. If the running commentary leans toward pessimism, you might hesitate whenever you're close to a breakthrough, convinced the risk of stepping forward outstrips any possible reward. On the flip side, when that internal voice frames setbacks as temporary or focuses on potential benefits rather than looming disasters, you find yourself more inclined to adapt and persist. Over time, these repeated interpretations, day in and day out, can shift the very foundation of your habits, influencing the big leaps you take and the small tasks you no longer postpone. If you wake up in the morning hearing a mental script that says, "I'm behind, I'll never catch up," it's no wonder your mood or willingness to act might be dampened. But if you train that script to say, "Plus handle a manageable piece right now, I'm making progress," that single tweak changes your entire approach to the day. One effective tactic for mastering self-dialogue is to create short mental pauses whenever you detect that your thoughts have ventured into a negative or unproductive loop. You might sense a downward spiral of self-criticism brewing after a minor inconvenience like missing an appointment or messing up a routine task. Right at that moment, you stop and identify the language pattern. Perhaps you notice words like always or never, as in always ruin things, or I'll never get this right. These absolutes are rarely accurate. By simply observing them, you start dismantling their hold on your perspective because you see their exaggerations rather than fact. You can then replace them with something more balanced. "Son, I messed up this time, but I've handled similar tasks effectively before." This switch might sound small, yet it can recast an emotional slump into a brief setback, letting you move on. Consciously using language that includes problem-solving words like "how can I," "when if I try," or "e might improve by," helps you view challenges as solvable. If you repeatedly say, "I can't figure out how to do this," you trap yourself in a statement that ends the conversation, leaving your brain with nowhere to go. But a phrase like "and I haven't figured it out yet, so let's think of options," opens a door for new ideas to enter. It's a subtle difference in wording, but your mind picks up on that invitation to keep exploring over time. That approach wires your instincts to keep searching for alternatives rather than giving up or ruminating in frustration. Shift in your internal dialogue influences relationships too. If your self-talk is harsh and unyielding, you can project that onto others, expecting them to be equally critical or demanding. Your defensive stance in conversations or your Reluctance to share ideas might stem from anticipating the same rejection your own mind dishes out. Conversely, if you cultivate an inner voice that's a bit more forgiving and open-minded, I might be missing something, so let's see what I can learn here. You become more receptive to what others propose. You carry a calmer energy into any group dynamic. People around you often mirror your tone, so if your self-talk fosters a balanced, solution-focused outlook, you might find interactions around you following suit. Curiosity remains a powerful antidote to self-doubt. Whenever that inner voice says, I'm not cut out for this, meeting it with, what if I dig deeper into why I'm uncertain, shifts the perspective from a static conclusion to an open question. That question can then prompt real investigation. Do you need more practice, or do you fear a specific aspect of the task, like public exposure or potential criticism? Once you isolate the real concern, I'm worried about stumbling in front of an audience, you can work on that directly. Maybe you practice your talk or visualize delivering your message confidently. Bit by bit, each small improvement answers that doubting voice with evidence, showing you're taking steps to address vulnerabilities rather than yielding to them. Self-awareness is the bedrock of this transformation. Many of us have a backlog of phrases we repeat internally, built up over years, labels like, I'm a procrastinator, or I'm too unorganized, or I'm not creative enough. We rarely notice how we echo these claims until we actively watch for them. That's why an initial exercise might be simply journaling your main self-descriptions for a week. You track each time a negative label pops up, I'm always behind. I'm the one who never learns. This reveals the patterns. Once visible, you can systematically rework them, questioning if they truly apply or if they're distorted generalizations that you've carried for too long. A fundamental point is to separate your sense of identity from your actions or your skill level at a given task. If your inner dialogue says, I failed, so I'm a failure, you merge a single event with your entire self-worth. With a healthier approach, you shift to, I failed at this attempt, but I remain capable of learning and evolving. That might sound like splitting hairs, but it's crucial for long-term resilience. People who tie every shortcoming to their overall identity become more prone to giving up because each setback feels like an attack on who they are. Yet those who see setbacks as discrete events remain flexible, scanning for what they can improve instead of labeling themselves incompetent. It's wise to invite a trustworthy friend or mentor to help you see your internal voice from an outside angle. Sometimes confiding, and I keep telling myself I can't handle this type of project, lets them offer a perspective that pokes holes in that assumption. They might remind you of tasks you handled well in the past, or point out where your negative statements seem to contradict your track record. By hearing the disconnect between your self-talk and what others observe, you realize how subjective and sometimes unfounded those inner conclusions are. Their input can reinforce your efforts to rewrite certain mental loops that keep undermining your confidence. Patience becomes necessary because rewiring a habit as ingrained as self-talk doesn't happen overnight. You might catch yourself slipping into old patterns and be tempted to become frustrated. I'm still thinking negatively, so I'm failing at this too. But that's precisely another instance of the self-defeating monologue creeping in. So you practice acceptance. Changing how I speak to myself takes time. Each moment of awareness is progress. This acceptance fosters a gentler cycle where each small improvement in your internal talk counts as a success, and each slip-up becomes a reminder to refine the skill further. Gradually, these micro-corrections accumulate into a broader shift in how your mind frames the events of your life. Shaping your inner voice has a direct impact on how you respond to unpredictable circumstances. In moments of uncertainty, when plans fall apart or unforeseen responsibilities appear, your initial thoughts might sway between anxiety and defeat. But if you've trained your self-talk to emphasize choices over complaints, you switch more smoothly into problem-solving mode. Instead of saying, "Sen, I can't believe this happened, everything's ruined," you catch yourself and ask, what's the next best step I can take? You acknowledge the frustration, but don't let it dominate the narrative. This pivot is subtle but powerful. It pulls focus away from feeling stuck toward figuring out solutions, big or small. Over time, you learn to interpret upheavals not as permanent derailments, but as signals to adapt. Insight into how your mind processes challenges can steer you away from overreacting. When your internal monologue is harsh, a single misstep can prompt a chain of negative thoughts. I messed up, which proves I'm unfit for this. But if you're attentive to your triggers, you might realize that certain events or certain times of day provoke an exaggerated sense of catastrophe. Recognizing this pattern doesn't prevent the initial surge of emotion, but gives you a chance to pause and say, This might be that wave of negativity I get when I'm pressed for time or behind schedule. Let me assess calmly before concluding it's a disaster. That small mental buffer disrupts an otherwise rapid descent into discouragement, allowing reason to surface. Modifying tone matters as well. Even if you stick to the same content, like talking about a tough deadline, the tone can shift from a complaint to a more assured acceptance. I have so much to do, I'll never finish. Morphs into, this is a tight deadline, but I can begin with the biggest task first. Or, let's see how far I can get in hours, then reevaluate. This reordering might appear minor, yet it reconfigures your emotional stance from defeated to engaged. You're still admitting the weight of the work, but affirming your capacity to make headway. As you keep practicing this shift, your self-talk evolves into a supportive coach rather than a relentless critic. Another angle is identifying what you want your self-talk to emphasize. If you're trying to build confidence in your creative abilities, your mind might habitually murmur doubts like, oh, my work isn't original, or no one cares about the stuff. You can counter these with reminders of what you enjoy about creating, and I find new angles every time I try, or my perspective might resonate with someone out there. It's not about forcibly hyping yourself up, but about giving equal or greater weight to possibilities and strengths rather than letting the mind's negativity bias overshadow everything. This rebalancing act ensures you don't discard your efforts prematurely. Overly harsh self-criticism often ties into comparisons with other people. You might look at someone else's achievements and conclude you're leagues behind, prompting an internal monologue of envy or defeat. Yet, a more constructive approach is to note their accomplishments as a source of inspiration or lessons. The self-talk might shift from, I'll never be as skilled, to net excelled by focusing in these areas. Maybe I can adapt a similar strategy. This rephrasing includes an action point, learning from others, rather than boiling down to a passive lament. By redirecting your mental commentary, you transform comparisons from discouraging to instructive, sparking curiosity instead of self-defeat. Consistency is crucial when you aim to rewrite your narrative. It's not enough to alter your internal speech for a few hours one day and then revert the rest of the week. You build momentum by correcting your thoughts regularly, even when the shift feels forced. In the beginning, you may find yourself repeating positive or constructive lines without fully believing them. But as you keep doing it, the new language starts to feel more natural, and your underlying attitudes follow suit. It's akin to learning a new skill. You practice often, awkwardly at first, until fluidity emerges. To accelerate the process, you might look for low-stakes environments to apply your revised self-talk. If you're cooking a challenging recipe or learning a small craft technique, pay attention to your mental chatter. Whenever frustration surfaces, course correct. Shana, not getting this right can become, I'll adjust one variable and try again. These situations let you practice altering your perspective without the full pressure of a major life goal. Seeing how it helps with these smaller tasks encourages you to employ the same method on larger projects, perhaps tackling a significant career change or a personal risk you've been avoiding. Healthy self-dialogue intertwines with setting clear, realistic benchmarks. If you routinely set the bar impossibly high, your inner voice might swing into criticism mode whenever you fall short. But by choosing targets that challenge yet remain attainable, you foster a gentle sense of accomplishment that fuels encouraging self-talk. You're less likely to hear, you're failing again, if your daily or weekly goals are aligned with your actual capacity. Conversely, if your goals are too tiny, you may not feel motivated. So you balance ambition with practicality, letting your internal dialogue note the progress rather than dwelling on perpetual inadequacy. The payoff of consistent, supportive self-talk appears in multiple areas of life. You might find that presentations or tough conversations require less mental battling because you approach them from a stance of, this is a chance to communicate and learn, rather than, I must prove my worth or fail. Your stress levels can dip as you've replaced catastrophic interpretations with more balanced ones. You might sleep better too because you're no longer replaying every perceived shortcoming in your head before bed. Moreover, people often notice an improved mood or energy around you as you radiate less tension when your thoughts aren't perpetually undermining your confidence. Still, the journey toward mastering your internal dialogue can stir deeper emotional layers. You may uncover insecurities rooted in past experiences, like failing at an early goal or receiving harsh criticism from authority figures. Confronting these can be uncomfortable as they reveal the foundation of your negative self-narratives. Yet acknowledging them is the first step toward releasing their hold. You might process them through journaling, personal reflection, or conversations with someone supportive. This introspection can transform what once felt like permanent scars into lessons that guide you toward more empathetic, constructive interdiscourse. Another perspective is seeing self-talk as a skill to be refined, much like public speaking or any craft you've practiced. Skilled communicators adapt their language based on context and feedback. Similarly, you adapt your mental language in response to new insights and changing circumstances. You grow more adept at detecting subtle cues like tension in your chest or a flash of irritation, which might signal a negative spiral forming. Rather than ignoring those cues, you lean in, adjusting the conversation in your head. Wait, let me step back and phrase this to myself in a kinder or more objective way. This dynamic approach keeps you flexible and prevents your dialogues from crystallizing into rigid, outdated scripts. Mastering your inner dialogue fosters a deeper self-trust. When you frequently sabotage yourself with dismissive or discouraging thoughts, you erode confidence in your own consistency. On the other hand, if you're used to hearing an internal voice that focuses on solutions and respects your efforts, you start believing in your own reliability. That belief underpins everything from setting bigger goals to taking calculated risks. Knowing that you won't berate yourself mercilessly for setbacks means you're more inclined to step outside your comfort zone. The net effect is an expanded range of possibilities for what you dare to pursue. Additionally, your new internal script often expands how you perceive and celebrate progress. With a critical inner voice, even real achievements can go unnoticed because the mind jumps immediately to the next flaw or undone task. But once you've conditioned your self-talk to include acknowledgement, I made headway here, that's a good milestone, your sense of fulfillment deepens. This positivity isn't about ignoring areas for improvement. It's about letting yourself absorb the reality of incremental victories, fueling motivation for the road ahead. That balanced appreciation nudges you to keep building on your successes instead of feeling they're never enough. When it comes to decision-making, the difference can be striking. A negative or indecisive internal commentary can cause you to overthink analyzing possible outcomes until you're paralyzed. A constructive voice, however, acknowledges unknowns but reminds you that very few decisions are final or irreversible. With that outlook, you experiment, recognizing that a wrong turn today might lead to an important discovery tomorrow. This perspective fosters a sense of adventure. Each path you explore, even if it's not perfect, refines your knowledge of what truly works. You become comfortable iterating your way to success, rather than demanding instantaneous perfection. Cultivating this sense of flexibility in your internal dialogue translates into resilience. Life inevitably brings phases where obstacles stack up. Maybe finances strain, personal relationships waver, or health concerns pop up. In those times, a supportive inner voice can be your anchor, reminding you that challenges are fluid and you still possess agency to adapt. Instead of flaring into panic or declaring everything lost, you pace yourself, confronting issues one by one. The shift might be as straightforward as replacing "it's all crashing down" with "things are tough, but let's see what we can handle first." That reorientation alone can preserve enough calm to start solving problems methodically. Adopting patterns of kinder self-talk doesn't mean sugarcoating brutal truths. There may be times you must acknowledge a significant shortfall or face the fact that you neglected certain responsibilities. The difference is that you let these realizations spur constructive thinking. This was overlooked, so how do I rectify it? Rather than an "I'm messed up, I'm worthless." That nuance sustains a sense of accountability without descending into destructive self-blame. You keep your dignity and potential intact, focused on practical measures to correct the course. By continually adjusting how you speak to yourself, you free up emotional bandwidth for empathy toward others. When you no longer exhaust mental energy on harsh internal critiques, you have more patience and understanding left over for your interactions. This shift can deeply influence teamwork, friendships, and personal bonds as you're more present and less consumed by your own mental battles. People sense that, finding you approachable and often reciprocating with openness, sparking a positive cycle in your relationships that might have felt out of reach before. In essence, mastering your inner dialogue can feel like flipping on a light switch in a dimly lit room. The objects of your life, your skills, your challenges, your resources haven't changed, but you finally see them clearly, free from the shadows cast by self-doubt or incessant negativity. With this clarity, you stop stumbling around your potential and start navigating it with confidence. Even if the path ahead remains rocky, at least you can pinpoint the stones and plan your steps carefully. Each time you choose words of possibility over words of defeat, you strengthen a mental framework that supports forward motion. This is the heart of why changing your inner voice changes everything. It influences every "is" or "knower" you speak, every piece of feedback you give yourself, and every door you consider knocking on. The transformation often feels gradual, like you're gradually remodeling an old house, replacing worn-out fixtures with functional, uplifting ones. Some days you might notice a surge in productivity and realize it's because you spent zero time berating yourself for small mistakes. Other days you might catch yourself almost falling back into old patterns, and then reversing course with a swift mental correction. Gradually, these moments add up to a life where self-trust, resilience, and a solution-focused spirit become second nature. That self-trust you build by nurturing and encouraging inner voice doesn't just shore up your own mindset, it spreads outward, subtly shaping the way you interact with others. Imagine meeting someone new or stepping into a collaborative project. If internally you keep telling yourself you have nothing valuable to offer or that you must impress them at all costs, the ensuing conversation can feel tense, guarded, or inauthentic. But if your internal voice is calm and open, reminding you that you can learn from them while sharing your own insights, you'll convey warmth and curiosity. People pick up on that genuine vibe. They see someone ready to contribute rather than someone overshadowed by self-consciousness. In turn, this fosters a more collaborative atmosphere since your approach invites mutual exchange instead of competition or insecurity. Your capacity to seize opportunities shifts when your internal dialogue supports rather than sabotages you. Maybe a part of you has long desired to enter a new field or branch out creatively, but consistently postponed it with sound arguments about why it couldn't possibly succeed. Once you turn those mental arguments around, insisting on highlighting potential rewards and acknowledging that each step, however small, is progress, you discover that taking practical steps forward is less daunting. You're not proclaiming guaranteed success, but you're taking action, learning, and adapting along the way. You're essentially granting yourself permission to begin by initiating calls or sending queries, progressing to drafting initial ideas. That momentum feels much more organic. When your mind affirms it's worth attempting instead of predicting failure, over time, this can unlock professional paths or personal endeavors you previously deemed unattainable. Managing stress also improves, as a persistently pessimistic inner voice can amplify every minor schedule disruption, critique, or small conflict into a storm of self-blame or unnecessary worry. Once you've trained your thoughts to view these stressors more calmly, acknowledging inconveniences while affirming your ability to handle them, the peaks of anxiety level out. You become skilled at distinguishing what's truly urgent from what's merely an old habit of exaggerating problems. This shift in perspective helps you direct energy where it's needed while shrugging off unnecessary panic. Throughout a busy week, this can be the decisive factor between feeling exhausted midweek and maintaining a steady pace until Friday. Adopting a growth mindset in your self-talk also influences how you tackle challenges. If every setback or mistake triggers a wave of criticism, labeling you as incapable or slow, you'll hesitate to experiment or adapt. Meanwhile, a kinder inner voice acknowledges that a particular strategy didn't work and suggests exploring other options. This fosters a spirit of experimentation, allowing you to test multiple approaches without feeling that each failure reflects on your personal worth. In creative pursuits, you become more willing to revise and rework sections if you see it as part of the process rather than a judgment of your talent. That willingness to iterate often distinguishes those who dabble occasionally from those who truly master their craft, whether in art, business, or any field requiring continuous improvement. Another aspect of mastering self-talk is enhancing how you handle feedback from others. When your default inner stance is negative, constantly doubting your own value, any external critique might cut deeper than it should. You might interpret every piece of feedback as an accusation or condemnation, reacting defensively. Conversely, if your internal script encourages growth and acknowledges that you're in a learning process, you'll likely filter external comments for what's constructive and disregard any unnecessary harshness. This balanced approach keeps you from dismissing all feedback or internalizing every negative remark, ensuring you remain open to useful suggestions while refining your abilities without crumbling under pointed observations. Maintaining a sense of humor about your self-talk can serve as a quick reset whenever you sense negativity creeping in. If you catch yourself mentally exclaiming that you're the worst at something, sometimes lightly laughing at the dramatics can diffuse the tension. Acknowledging, okay, that's a bit over the top, I'm just a beginner in this area, can disrupt the seriousness of the moment, reminding you not to take every internal statement as absolute truth. Humor can foster resilience, making it easier to bounce back from minor stumbles because you see them as human missteps rather than fatal flaws. One might wonder if controlling your internal voice too tightly risks ignoring genuine gut feelings. The answer is nuanced. You're not silencing valid concerns, but refining how they're expressed. A cautionary instinct that a new partnership might be risky still has value. You address it by investigating or placing safeguards rather than letting it balloon into a belief that you can't trust anyone and should abandon the idea. Essentially, you preserve the wisdom in your doubts while discarding the panic laid in exaggerations. That middle path, taking the hint without spiraling, underscores the difference between reasoned caution and destructive negativity. Habits reinforce these mental shifts. Some find it effective to start each morning with a brief statement of intention, such as, intend to face challenges with patience and keep my self-talk constructive. By verbalizing or writing it, you prime yourself to catch any slip into old patterns. Similarly, a quick reflection before bed can highlight where you upheld supportive internal language and where you fell back into criticism. Even a minute or two spent on these daily bookends fosters a sense of continuity, so each day builds on the last. Over weeks, the effect compounds as fewer negative autopilot reactions slip through unnoticed. If boredom threatens to erode your disciplined self-talk, you might try varying your approach. Instead of repeating the same phrases, adopt fresh ones each week or tailor them to your current focus. Maybe you spend 1 week emphasizing phrases that boost courage, like I handle the unknown with creativity, and another week focusing on consistency, such as I complete what I start. Cycling these themes keeps you from growing numb to a single repetitive mantra. Each new angle addresses a dimension of your life where negativity tends to seep in, gradually fortifying a broad base of constructive thinking. A moment arrives when you truly sense the difference your refined self-talk makes. It could be a situation that would have ordinarily rattled you, an unexpected critique in a meeting, a last-minute request from a colleague, or a personal challenge like starting an unfamiliar hobby. Where the old voice might have launched into self-deprecation or worry, you hear a calmer perspective. Maybe it says, "Tennis is tough, but I can handle it piece by piece," or I didn't expect this, but let's find a workable approach." You respond with measured actions, not paralysis or meltdown. That moment clarifies that your mental narrative has indeed evolved. You're no longer giving negativity the final word. Over a longer stretch, mastering your inner dialogue shifts your baseline demeanor, both in private thoughts and outward expressions. You might notice your posture change as you stop bracing for disaster or your tone lighten when discussing projects. People sometimes comment, and you seem more relaxed these days, and it's not just about fewer external problems. Rather, you've learned to self-manage the mental narratives that amplify stress. It doesn't guarantee an easy path, but it cultivates a steadier presence when dealing with life's ups and downs. Suddenly, those external circumstances you once feared or let overshadow your motivation feel more like manageable tasks or challenges than catastrophic blockades. This isn't about editing your thoughts into nonstop cheerleading. There's still value in honest critique. Sometimes you do need to push yourself or see what's lacking. The real magic is turning raw criticism into impetus for growth. I handled that poorly. Evolves into, I want to improve. Let me figure out how. That difference is pivotal. It points you towards solutions and forward motion, not resignation. You keep your mind flexible, always seeking the next action instead of the nearest excuse to give up. All these shifts culminate in a broader sense of alignment. You steadily close the gap between who you want to be and how you behave daily. Each time you direct your internal commentary toward learning and confidence, you nudge yourself closer to the version of you that thrives on challenges rather than fears them. Each time you interrupt a cycle of self-criticism, you invest in mental well-being and personal progression. The synergy extends beyond self-improvement, influencing collaborations, relationships, and even the creative spark you bring to your goals. As your thoughts adapt to highlight constructive roots, your environment seems to provide more opportunities simply because you're now receptive to them instead of fixating on reasons they won't work. It's remarkable how this internal conversation can open or shut doors you never knew existed. The very act of countering an automatic and uncant, with a gentle and I'm learning how to reorient your energy. One day you may catch yourself saying, "And I'm not sure I should try," and decide instead to phrase it as, "And might learn something if I give it a shot." That single alteration can steer your decision from hiding away to making a move. This applies to everything from everyday efforts, like tackling a tricky recipe or taking care of a nagging chore, to the bigger leaps, like pitching a venture idea or starting a creative project you've mulled over for years. Before long, you realize that each choice you make is being shaped by a more optimistic, solution-based logic, and life starts to feel more malleable. A valuable companion to supportive self-talk is specificity. Instead of allowing your mind to complain, "and I'm too disorganized," you focus on a specific area where disorder appears, such as, "I often lose track of deadlines, due to scattered notes. This narrower statement immediately points to a fix, like consolidating tasks into a single planner or digital file. That clarity counters vague negativity with a concrete plan. You do the same with intangible worries like, "And I'm overwhelmed." Break it down, and I feel pressured by these three priorities. That breakdown reveals possible steps, maybe reassign one task or stretch a deadline. The more precise you get, the less room your mind has to amplify a feeling of doom without any path forward. Finding a pace that suits your rhythms facilitates a more uplifting mental script. If you push yourself at a frantic speed that ignores your natural concentration spans or rest needs, frustration and self-criticism flare up. You might start scolding yourself for not keeping up with an unrealistic pace. Adjusting your workflow to include healthy intervals for rest, creative wandering, or simpler tasks respects how your mind and body operate. Then, when that self-talk arises, Pyrus, why aren't you doing more right now? You have an answer rooted in balance. I'm managing my energy to stay productive longer, rather than burning out over time. You replace guilt-laden thoughts about rest or slow periods with respect for your personal tempo, reducing those jabs of internal negativity. Role-playing scenarios with more encouraging words can speed the rewiring process. In private or with a trusted friend, you might articulate, "If I run into a tough question at work, I usually panic and call myself stupid." Instead, I want to say, "I'm facing an intricate problem. Let me break it down systematically." By rehearsing these phrases before you actually need them, you increase the chance they'll surface when tension arises. You effectively store them in your mental library, ready to replace the old, harsher reflex. This practice might feel contrived initially, but like any mental habit, repetition cements it. When a real challenge strikes, you recall the prepared line, bridging the gap between theoretical positivity and genuine self-support. Another subtle but meaningful step is honoring improvements, however small. Perhaps you managed to speak up in a meeting, whereas previously you'd stay silent, telling yourself you had nothing worthy to add, congratulating yourself. "That was me pushing past doubt," reinforces the cycle of better self-dialogue. You see that a shift in your internal script can affect actual outcomes, and that recognition sparks further motivation to keep refining your thoughts. The next time you sense hesitation, you remind yourself of that success, creating a track record of small victories that stand as evidence against the old voices of inadequacy. If your environment is filled with influences that constantly downplay the importance of mindset, you might have to shield your progress from casual negativity. You can't always convert everyone around you into champions of constructive self-talk. Sometimes you simply need to detach a bit from draining conversations or lighten interactions with those who pour cynicism into your day. The crucial point is preserving your own mental environment, ensuring that the progress you're making internally doesn't get undercut by relentless downers. This doesn't mean cutting people off hastily. It means regulating how much you internalize or engage with their negativity. And while many strive for purely positive affirmations, a grounded approach acknowledges both the challenges and your capacity to address them. Statements like "everything will be perfect" can feel hollow if circumstances are indeed tough. A more balanced line, "I'm facing real obstacles, but I can handle each part step by step," blends honesty with confidence. This mixture keeps you tethered to reality without yielding to despair. You let your internal dialogue be a supportive partner rather than a cheerleader oblivious to difficulties. That way, you strengthen your resolve to act even amid genuine hardships, instead of relying on blind optimism that might crack at the first sign of adversity. Consider, too, the ripple effect on long-held dreams. If for years you've told yourself, "I can't start a business," or "I can't switch careers," it might feel like a fundamental truth. But as you shift your monologue to, "I can learn the basics," or "I can map out a safe transition," you open a path that wasn't visible under a storm of negative assumptions. Sometimes the greatest change comes not from discovering brand new opportunities, but from seeing the existing ones through a different lens, one that's tuned to problem solving rather than defeat. This can cause a quick escalation. Once you see a possibility you'd overlooked, you act on it, and fresh developments arise that further encourage you. It's a cycle of confidence, feeding opportunity, feeding more confidence. Physical habits can complement your mental shift. Exercise routines or mindful stretches can ground your body, helping stabilize your thought patterns. A body that's tense, neglected, or fatigued often pairs with a mind that's more vulnerable to self-defeating commentary. When you release tension via movement, you loosen the mental rigidity that fuels negative self-judgment. Combine this with stable sleep routines and balanced nutrition, and your brain is less likely to cling to harsh narratives simply because it's operating with steadier hormones and clearer energy. Moreover, Having a purposeful reason behind each goal cements your self-talk's direction. Instead of telling yourself, "Sin, I must do this because others expect it," you might affirm, "I'm doing this because it aligns with what I value," like creativity, independence, or helping people. That motivation frames every internal conversation around meaning rather than obligation, making it more difficult for negative chatter to derail you by asserting, "This isn't really important." You have a reminder of exactly why it's important, which bolsters your determination each time you feel uncertainty rising. Mastering internal dialogue involves boundaries too, knowing when to hush your mind and allow silence. Sometimes you notice yourself overthinking a decision, analyzing angles into oblivion. It's at these moments a calm directive to your mind, like, "I'll pause thinking about this for now," can bring relief. You accept that relentless mental chatter isn't always helpful, especially when it loops the same concerns. By granting yourself permission to stop overanalyzing, you steer away from the kind of ruminations that breed unnecessary anxiety. This is an aspect of self-talk as well, instructing your mind when it's time to rest or shift focus, preserving mental energy for more purposeful tasks. Children or younger relatives can benefit when they see you modeling healthier inner speech. If they watch you handle frustration by calmly saying, and said, "I'll give this another shot," instead of a sign, "I always fail," they learn to frame challenges similarly. It's a subtle effect. They internalize that it's okay to struggle, it's normal to adapt, and that you don't have to label yourself inadequate for not excelling instantly. This generational influence underscores the broad impact of your self-talk. It shapes not only your journey, but signals to others that resilience and kindness to oneself can coexist, even when progress is slow. Still, the greatest benefit is personal fulfillment. By guiding your mental dialogue to be constructive, you free yourself from many invisible battles that drain enthusiasm. You reclaim the energy once eaten up by catastrophizing or self-punishment, funneling it into the things that enrich your life. You move through tasks with a certain lightness because you're not dragging negative scripts behind you. And as you accumulate evidence of your abilities and perseverance, your self-image evolves. You see yourself as someone capable of learning and adapting, rather than someone perpetually at the mercy of harsh judgments. These changes, though subtle at first, can accelerate after a period of consistent effort. You might look back over a few months and notice how an issue that once paralyzed you, something like speaking up in group settings, now barely triggers a second thought. Your self-talk has reshaped your default assumptions, making once daunting actions feel routine. That realization often sparks a second wave of momentum. If you could conquer that fear, what else is possible with continued refinement of your inner dialogue? Each wave of progress further undermines any lingering negativity, setting you on a path of self-guided evolution. Sustaining momentum in transforming your inner voice often hinges on daily routines that keep you aware of your thought patterns, even when life is busy or distractions surge. Simple check-ins can help. Perhaps once every morning and once in the evening, you briefly note the tone of your self-talk. Did it lean supportive or critical? If you realize you slipped into old habits of harsh self-judgment, that recognition alone can prime you to do better in the next cycle. If you berated yourself midday for being too slow at a task, you can, by evening, rewrite that particular narrative. And I took a bit more time than expected, but I learned how to streamline it next time. This act of redescribing your day invests in a gentler, more constructive perspective, which gradually becomes second nature. Another technique is to create mental set points for yourself, akin to guardrails that keep your thoughts from spiraling too far into negativity. Maybe you decide that whenever you catch an extreme phrase, something like, "I always do this wrong," or "I'll never get anywhere," you immediately follow it with a clarifying statement that's more balanced, such as, "Is it really always? Probably not. Yesterday, I handled a similar situation effectively." By enforcing these set points, you cut off the momentum that sweeping negative statements can gather, effectively short-circuiting the loop of self-defeat. Over time, you find that these corrections appear almost automatically, leaving you less emotionally drained by harsh exaggerations. In the midst of a hectic schedule, self-talk can direct how you allocate focus. If you wake up telling yourself, there's too much to handle, I'll never finish, you risk flitting aimlessly from one minor task to another without solid progress. But if you nudge yourself to say, "I'll knock out the highest impact task first, then handle smaller ones," your entire approach shifts. Instead of letting anxiety drive your day, you harness clarity. Even if that main task only gets partly done, you'll have made headway on something truly relevant, preventing guilt or blame at day's end. This precise direction often arises from a supportive internal voice that acknowledges the workload, but points you to an actionable method. Your inner dialogue can become a reservoir of encouragement when external circumstances offer little support. If you're surrounded by skepticism or dealing with a lack of immediate validation, a guiding self-voice can step up, reminding you of your reasons, past successes, and the importance of persevering anyway. In that sense, it functions like an internal ally who doesn't vanish when conditions turn rough. You maintain your drive even if no one else is cheering you on at the moment. It's not about isolating yourself from others. It's about ensuring that your belief in what you're doing doesn't crumble if external validation is missing. Nor is it about fostering blind optimism. A healthy internal conversation might readily admit that a project is risky or that a certain plan needs rethinking, but it follows up that admission with a proactive stance, such as, let's see where we can mitigate the risk, or time to brainstorm alternative approaches. This pivot ensures that challenges remain challenges, not reasons to abandon your goals. Each time you convert a worry or a complaint into a call for resourcefulness, you reinforce the habit of using mental energy to solve rather than to mope. Even the way you interpret other people's opinions links back to your self-talk. If someone criticizes an idea, an unsupportive monologue might echo, "'Tis proves I'm out of my depth." But with a more constructive bent, you might interpret it as, "Panay have concerns. Let's see if I can address them." Or perhaps their criticism highlights a valuable adjustment I can make. By framing external feedback that way, you remain engaged instead of discouraged. Over time, this pattern helps you refine your approach by filtering out the destructive interpretation, leaving space for actual improvement. Setting many milestones for your mental growth can anchor the transformation. Perhaps you say, by the end of this week, I want to catch and rephrase at least 3 negative automatic thoughts each day. Or, I'll record one instance every day where I replaced a destructive phrase with a balanced one. This not only keeps you accountable, but shows daily results. By Sunday, you'll look back and see multiple instances where your mindset did shift. That visibility builds confidence in the process. You realize you're not just reading about healthy self-talk, you're actively installing it in your life. Emotional intelligence grows in tandem with better self-talk because you're more alert to the triggers or contexts that spark negative commentary. You grow more sensitive to your emotional states. You detect frustration early. You notice restlessness before it becomes panic. Then your refined inner voice steps in, providing guidance like, I might be feeling restless because I've been tackling the same problem for hours. Let's take a short break or switch tasks to stay productive. This small pivot saves you from countless moments of self-reproach. Over time, you see that your emotional reactions, once you decode them, become signals guiding you to adapt your approach, rather than signals to shut down. This gradual shift helps you stop conflating stress with failure, where an unhelpful monologue might interpret pressure as a sign you're unfit for the job. A more supportive voice interprets that stress as a sign you're pushing new boundaries. Instead of sinking into dread, this is too much. You say, yes, it's tough because I'm expanding my capabilities. That perspective doesn't erase the difficulty, but reframes it as a natural part of growth. Repeatedly responding this way lowers the emotional toll that stress often exacts, preserving more energy for tackling the tasks at hand. A key step is to maintain flexibility in how you speak to yourself. Rigid self-talk can sometimes be just as limiting as negative self-talk. If you adopt a mantra like, and I'm always strong, you might struggle when inevitably you feel fragile or uncertain. Instead, balancing that idea, and I usually find ways to handle adversity, though I might have moments of vulnerability, holds more truth and adaptability. That nuance allows you to handle rough patches without discarding your newly built confidence. You accept the ups and downs as part of the journey, letting your self-talk guide you instead of shaming you when you waver. You might note that mastering inner dialogue doesn't happen in a vacuum. External knowledge, like reading about resilience, listening to personal growth discussions, or talking with mentors, can broaden the vocabulary you use with yourself. Every fresh insight or strategy you pick up becomes another phrase or viewpoint you can weave into your internal commentary. Eventually, your mind is stocked not just with generic reassurances, but with specific references, like something specific about someone who overcame a similar hurdle or a concept about time management you're now applying. This library of examples and techniques enriches your self-talk, making it more targeted and effective. And though all these adjustments may feel granular, catching a self-criticism here, substituting a constructive phrase there, the compound effect is formidable. The big leaps in life, whether career shifts or personal achievements, are often built from dozens of small daily decisions. Each of those decisions is influenced by how you narrate the possibilities and the risks. Thus, as your self-talk increasingly supports taking calculated action, learning from mistakes, and trusting in your ability to adapt, you accelerate along paths you once found intimidating. You become more consistent in following through because the voice that used to coax you into postponement no longer holds as much sway. Ultimately, when you look back on a period of concerted effort, maybe 6 months or a year, after you start focusing on refining your self-talk, you'll likely see a dramatic shift in how you tackle everyday tasks and approach long-term goals. Where you once might have dismissed an idea outright, you now explore its feasibility. Where you might have spiraled into self-critique after an error, you now salvage what can be salvaged and move on with minimal, self-inflicted damage. It might even surprise you how natural it feels, as though a voice that used to sabotage you has been replaced by a consistent, steady ally. That inner ally won't eliminate all obstacles, but it certainly ensures you navigate them with greater resilience and clarity. Your internal dialogue can be the soft current that carries you forward or the undertow that pulls you back. When you make the effort to shape it, to choose words of realism and possibility over self-judgment and doubt, your day-to-day life expands. You stop draining energy on thoughts that undermine you and instead cultivate an outlook that sees setbacks as lessons, critics as opportunities to refine, and risks as gateways to growth. It's not a switch you flip once. It's an ongoing discipline of noticing negative loops, questioning their accuracy, and rewriting them into something more balanced. Over time, this discipline seeps into every aspect of who you are, influencing how you respond under stress, how you celebrate small wins, and how you plan for larger goals. Each moment of gentle self-correction adds up, bridging the gap between a life overshadowed by hidden doubts and one driven by a resilient spirit.